Why was the enemy commander smiling when the cell door clanged shut? That was the thought that echoed in her mind as the lock turned, sealing her in darkness that smelled of damp concrete and iron. He believed she wouldn't last a week here. That a lone American soldier, wounded, isolated, cut off from her team, would crumble like the others. His smirk carried centuries of arrogance, the kind men wore when they thought they had stripped someone of power. But Alexis Reaper Morgan wasn't like the others. She wasn't here because she'd been careless. She was here because a mission had gone wrong in ways no intelligence report had predicted. She sat down on the floor, pressing her back against the cold wall. The pain in her shoulder pulsed with each heartbeat, residue from the blast that had separated her from her unit. Yet behind the pain there was no panic, only calculation. The commander saw a medic locked in his prison. What he couldn't see, what he couldn't possibly understand, was everything that had come before this moment. Long before she wore the uniform of the 75th Ranger Regiment, long before she answered to Staff Sergeant Morgan, long before her call sign, Reaper, carried weight in whispers among soldiers who'd seen what she could do. Her story hadn't begun in this prison cell. It had begun in the mountains of North Carolina. The Blue Ridge air was sharp in her memory, pine and damp earth mixing with the smoke of her grandfather's campfire. She was just a girl then, hair tangled, boots too big but eyes already restless with questions. Her grandfather, James Ghost Walker Morgan, watched her stumble through underbrush with a half-smile. "Little warrior," he would say, steady and grave. "Survival isn't about gear, it isn't about numbers, it's about thinking, thinking like your enemy, thinking like the land itself." He knew. He had lived through jungles where the air itself seemed to suffocate men. Vietnam had forged him into something the army wrote about in whispers but never printed in textbooks. He taught her the same way he had taught himself, through silence, through trial, through patience that sometimes felt cruel. Her grandmother, Sarah Silent Wind Morgan, carried different lessons. Cherokee blood ran in her veins, wisdom that reached back through generations of hunters and trackers who knew how to disappear into forests as though swallowed whole. Sarah moved without breaking a twig, without startling a bird. She read the bend of grass, the shift of wind, the silence of animals as though they were words in a book only she could see. Together, they shaped Alexis into something rare. Her grandfather gave her grit, tactical thinking, the art of turning fear into a weapon. Her grandmother gave her invisibility, the art of listening to what the world whispered when no one else noticed. Most kids spent weekends at malls. Alexis spent her sleeping in lean-tos made of branches, surviving on roots and berries her grandmother pointed out with an unspoken nod. Most kids learned sports drills. Alexis learned to track deer through mud and vanish from her grandfather's gaze even as he circled the ridge searching. "Don't fight the land," Sarah would tell her softly, placing a hand on Alexis's cheek. "Flow with it, listen, and it will carry you." Her grandfather was harsher. "Enemies don't break you with bullets, girl. They break you with time, with hunger, with fear. Learn to bend without snapping and you'll outlast them all." At the time, Alexis thought it was just family eccentricity, just old people clinging to wars that had ended decades ago. But those lessons clung to her bones like scars. And now in this cold cell in a mountain fortress, those scars stirred awake. The commander had left with a promise. 3 days, that's all it will take. His men laughed. The sound was ugly. Alexis listened to the fatting footsteps. She slowed her breathing, counting heartbeats. She wasn't thinking about escape yet. Not tonight. Tonight she was cataloging. Where was the vent? Where was the water leak she'd heard dripping somewhere to her left? How often did the guards rotate? What keys jingled on which hip? What kind of fatigue did their boots leave in the dirt outside the bars? Every detail mattered. This wasn't panic. It wasn't even anger. It was the same quiet calculation she had carried as a girl when her grandfather blindfolded her and told her to find her way home through the forest. The same patience she had learned while crouched with her grandmother for hours, waiting for a deer to reveal itself by the flick of an ear. Fear was there, of course. It always was. The taste of it sat at the back of her throat. The fear of never seeing her team again, of being forgotten, of being used as propaganda, paraded on some video to break morale back home. But she didn't let fear control the wheel. She let it ride in the backseat, whispering reminders of what was at stake. Her thoughts flicked back to Ranger School, the drills where they broke you down to dust, where sleep deprivation clawed at your sanity, where hunger gnawed at your insides, where instructors watched to see who would crack and who would sharpen. She had sharpened, and that memory of nights where she thought her body would collapse but her mind refused was her anchor. The cell wasn't breaking her, it was shaping her. Hours blurred, days slipped by like sand through fingers. Guards came and went. Some jeered, some ignored her. One lingered too long, staring through bars with the kind of hunger that had nothing to do with food. Alexis met his eyes without flinching. She needed him to believe she was steady, broken maybe, but still predictable. Inside, she was memorizing the limp in his left leg, the way he held his rifle too loosely, the fact that his belt sagged where the keys weighed heavy. Everything was information. Information was survival. On the third night, hunger gripped her belly like a fist. They hadn't given her enough to keep her strong, just enough to keep her alive. But hunger wasn't new to her. Hunger was the old companion she had met years ago in the Blue Ridge when her grandfather rationed food deliberately thin to teach her endurance. She lay flat on the cell floor, cheek against cold concrete, and closed her eyes. She wasn't in a prison anymore. She was back in the mountains, dirt under her nails, frost on her breath. Her grandfather's voice. Little warrior, if you wait long enough, even fear gets tired of waiting. That thought gave her calm. She let the guards believe the hunger was breaking her. She let them see a soldier wasting away. But inside, she was sharpening again. There was something else. Something she hadn't told anyone in her unit before capture. A secret tucked deep into her chest. She had carried it through deployments, through firefights, through long nights staring at desert skis. She hadn't told her closest friend. She hadn't told her commander. She was afraid, afraid of who she became when cornered. Because when she fought, when survival demanded, she wasn't the medic anymore. She wasn't the healer. She was something darker, something closer to the hunters her grandmother spoke of, warriors who blurred lines between human and shadow. That was why they had given her the call sign Reaper. It hadn't just been about her combat record. It was the way she could vanish into terrain, the way enemies fell before they even realized they were hunted. But deep down, Alexis sometimes wondered if it was eating her humanity. Here in the belly of enemy territory, she felt that shadow stirring again, and part of her feared it. Yet another part of her, the part that wanted to see her team again, the part that thought of her grandfather's grave and her grandmother's quiet eyes, welcomed it. The commander's mistake was simple. He thought captivity would crush her spirit, but captivity was where Alexis Morgan was born. She sat up on the fourth night, eyes glinting in the dark. She had memorized enough. She knew the weaknesses, the cracks in their routine. The cell was no longer a cage. It was a starting line. And the commander's smile, the one she had replayed in her mind since the moment the lock clicked, would soon vanish. Because the prisoner wasn't waiting to be rescued. The prisoner was becoming the predator. Why hadn't they searched her more carefully? It was the thought she kept circling back to as the guard's footsteps faded down the corridor. They'd stripped her of weapons, gear, her comms unit. But they hadn't stripped her of memory, of instinct, of the tiny fragments she'd hidden so deep even she barely noticed them. Like the sliver of metal pressed into the lining of her boot, harmless to the untrained eye, a fragment sharp enough, though, to pick at a lock if time and patience worked in her favor. She hadn't touched it yet. Timing was everything. She listened. The compound breathed around her. Men coughed in distant rooms. Generators hummed like a steady heartbeat beneath the floor. A dog barked somewhere far off, sharp, frustrated, then silenced with a shout. She was building a map, one sound at a time. And as she mapped, her mind pulled her backward, back to the night everything went wrong. It should have been routine. Reconnaissance in the mountains, nothing more. A team of professionals sent to gather intelligence on what intelligence insisted was an abandoned camp. She was there as medic, just in case, always just in case. But even before the first shot cracked through the night, Alexis had felt it. The silence had been wrong, not empty, listening, waiting. The explosion had come next, a roar that tore rock from cliff, rolling thunder that crushed escape routes into rubble. In an instant she was cut off, thrown against stone, ears ringing. The last thing she saw before darkness was her team turning to fight, shouting her name as dust swallowed them whole. When she woke, she was surrounded, rifles aimed, men grinning like wolves who had cornered prey. And through it all, her first thought hadn't been of herself. It had been of the wounded she couldn't reach, of the soldiers calling for her that she couldn't answer. That guilt lived inside her now, coiled and restless. It wasn't just survival at stake in this prison, it was redemption. Keys jangled again. She opened her eyes, head tilted, body slack like exhaustion had won. The same guard entered, the one with the limp, the one who lingered too long. His name she'd overheard was Mahmud, young, cocky, dangerous not because of skill but because of arrogance. He stepped closer than necessary, food tray in hand. He smirked when he thought she wasn't looking. She felt her pulse quicken, not in fear but in recognition. He was the weak link. And in war, the chain always broke at its weakest link. But not yet, not tonight. She needed to know the routine better. Who relieved him? How often? What door did he vanish through when the shift ended? She let him believe she was too tired to meet his eyes. She let him leave thinking he'd won something just by starring. All the while, she counted the seconds between the slam of her door and the fatting echo of his boots. 7 seconds until he turned the corner, 4 more until the outer door, 11 total. That was a window. Small but a window. She lay on the floor, tracing cracks in concrete with her finger. She remembered ranger school again, the days when hunger made her dizzy, when rain soaked through every layer and instructors screamed until her body felt hollow. Those nights, she had whispered to herself the same words her grandfather had once spoken. If you wait long enough, even fear gets tired. But waiting wasn't enough here. This wasn't training. This was war, and war meant timing. It wasn't the first time she'd been alone behind enemy lines. Afghanistan had tested her before. She thought of the Valley ambush, the mission that had given her the call sign Reaper, a patrol pinned down, bleeding out. She had gone in alone when protocol said wait for backup. She hadn't waited. She couldn't. That night she moved like shadow, one hand on her rifle, the other steadying the bandages on a soldier who would have bled out if she'd hesitated. She killed silently, worked quickly. By the time reinforcements arrived, the Taliban were gone and 3 Americans were alive who shouldn't have been. Her commander had pulled her aside after. Reaper, he had said, not unkindly, because wherever you move, death follows for them, not for us. She hadn't liked the name at first. It made her sound cold, ruthless, and part of her worried it was true. But in this cell, as her plan began to take shape, she realized the name wasn't a curse. It was a reminder. She wasn't here just to survive. She was here to finish something. The next night, she tested her window. Mahmud lingered again, smug grin in place. She accepted the food, hands trembling just enough to convince him she was weak. He turned to leave. She counted 1, 2, 3. At 10 seconds, she pressed her ear to the bars. His limp gave him away every time. He was gone. She sat back down, heartbeat steady. Tomorrow night, that would be the night she acted. But action meant risk, and risk meant a question she hadn't yet answered. When she stepped out of this cell, would she still be the medic who saved lives, or the shadow who took them without hesitation? Could she be both? The question gnawed at her as sleep pulled her under. Dreams came fractured and sharp, her team's voices calling her name, her grandfather's face stern in firelight, her grandmother's hand gentle but firm guiding her through forest paths. Then another voice quieter, her own, whispering from somewhere in the dark, "You're not afraid of dying here, you're afraid of who you'll have to become to live." She woke before dawn, sweat cold on her skin. The compound was stirring, boots on gravel. Orders barked in a language she only half understood. But tones spoke louder than words, urgency, unease. Something was wrong outside these walls. She smiled faintly in the dark. Paranoia was already growing. And paranoia was her ally. By the fourth night, everything was set. Mahmud arrived, tray in hand, grin already forming. He leaned in too close. She met his eyes this time, steady, unblinking. He didn't notice her hand move, didn't feel the strike until it was too late. A precise pressure to the carotid, a twist of his arm, his body crumpling soundlessly to the floor. She dragged him inside before the echo faded, closed the door behind her, listened, silence. Her heart pounded, but not with panic, with purpose. She had his keys, his weapon, his uniform. For the first time since capture, the balance had shifted. She wasn't the prisoner anymore. And as she slipped into the shadows of the corridor, she felt it settle into her bones. The hunt had begun. Why hadn't the alarm sounded yet? That was the question pressing against Alexis's mind as she crouched in the shadow of a stone wall, Mahmud's weapon slung across her chest. She had expected shouting, chaos, boots pounding toward her cell. But the night was still. The guards didn't know, not yet. The limp body she had dragged into the corner would not be found until morning, maybe later. And by then, the real work would have already begun. She tightened her grip on the weapon, breathing steady. It wasn't the rifle she knew, but she didn't need familiarity. She needed opportunity. Every sense stretched outward. The hum of generators, the faint scrape of gravel where another guard shifted weight, the metallic rattle of chains in the distance. All of it painted a picture, invisible to anyone who wasn't listening. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. Prey reveals itself in silence, not sound. Listen to what the quiet tells you. The quiet was telling her there were gaps. She moved low through the corridor, steps measured. Her body remembered the drills, heel, toe, roll, breathing shallow, eyes cutting to every angle. The compound wasn't built for intruders. It was built to keep captives in, which meant once she was outside the cell, the guards grew careless. And careless men died quickly. She spotted him, her first mark, leaning against a wall near the entrance to the communications room. A cigarette glowed between his fingers, the ember lighting his face in intervals. He was young, too young, probably recruited with promises of brotherhood and purpose. Her chest tightened. She could have walked away, slipped past, but she knew the truth. Leaving him meant risk. Risk meant discovery. Discovery meant her mission ended before it began. She moved, one smooth step then another. His cigarette lifted toward his lips. Her arm wrapped around his neck before he even exhaled. A quick squeeze to the carotid. His body went slack in seconds. She lowered him silently, catching the ember before it hit the ground, pressed it into dirt until it died. Her hands lingered for a beat on his face. He couldn't have been more than 19. She whispered to herself, almost a prayer, "I'm sorry." The guilt stayed with her as she searched the room he'd been guarding. Communications equipment filled the space, radios, monitors, wires coiled like veins. One man sat at the desk, headset over his ears. His back was to her. This one she couldn't spare. She moved faster this time. A hand over his mouth, knife to throat. He jerked once, then fell still. Her breath hitched as she lowered him. A medic's hands weren't meant to do this. They were meant to stitch, to stop bleeding, to cradle life back from the edge. And yet here she was, trading gauze for steel. It wasn't the first time she'd blurred that line. In Afghanistan, under fire, she had carried both rifle and medical kit, one hand saving a comrade while the other ended the threat that caused the wound. She had reconciled it then by calling it necessity. But this felt different, intimate, personal. She closed her eyes. Her grandfather's words came back. Survival isn't about what you take, it's about what you refuse to lose. She refused to lose her team's lives, their safety, the chance to stop what Hassan was planning. The justification steadied her hands. Hours passed. One by one she cut threads from the net Hassan had spun. A guard outside the weapons storage, another on the perimeter. Always quick, always silent, always without hesitation. She didn't need to eliminate them all, just enough, just the right ones. By dawn, 3 men were gone, their absence unnoticed in the shuffle of shift changes and fatigue. But by the second day, whispers began. Questions in the mess hall, unease in the barracks. Where was Mahmud? Had anyone seen the perimeter watch? Why hadn't the comms operator checked in? Paranoia was a seed, and Alexis had planted it carefully. In her stolen hours of rest, hidden in the tunnels beneath the compound, memories invaded. The first time she lost a patient. She was 19, fresh in training, hands shaking over a wound too deep to close. She had done everything right, textbook procedure. Still, the soldier's pulse had faded under her fingertips. She had sat in silence afterward, staring at blood staining her gloves, wondering if she had failed, wondering if she was meant for this. Her instructor had found her, crouched beside her like a father might. "You'll remember everyone you lose," he'd said quietly. "And you should, because the day you stop remembering is the day you stop being human." She wondered now if eliminating enemies counted the same way, if she'd carry each of them with her too. But there wasn't room for hesitation. Hesitation was death. By the third night, Hassan noticed. He sat in his office, maps spread across the table, men shifting nervously outside the door. Reports filtered in, guards missing, comms silent, equipment tampered with. Hassan's jaw clenched. He had built his reputation on control, breaking Americans, not losing them. The idea that a single captive, a woman no less, was unraveling his fortress was unthinkable. "Search the compound," he barked. "Every tunnel, every room, she is here. She is not a ghost. Find her." But even as he spoke, a shadow inside him stirred, doubt. Because ghosts were exactly what his men whispered about now. And fear was spreading faster than orders could contain. Alexis listened from below. Her base of operations, a hollow carved between maintenance tunnels, was crude but sufficient. She had food, water from a leaking pipe, weapons scavenged from her eliminations. But more than that, she had control. From here she could hear them, their boots on stone, their arguments in low voices, their fear growing with every hour. Her grandfather would have called it psychological warfare. Her grandmother would have called it balance, the predator reminding prey that arrogance has a cost. Alexis just called it survival. Yet in the silence of her hideout, when adrenaline faded, the conflict returned. She thought of the 19-year-old with the cigarette, of the operator who never saw her coming. Their faces lingered, unshakable. "Am I becoming what they think I am?" she whispered into the dark. Her own voice startled her, rough, hollow, almost unrecognizable. No answer came, only the drip of water, the hum of generators, the steady beat of her own heart reminding her she was still alive. Alive and dangerous. On the 7th night, the compound was restless. Half of Hassan's men had vanished or fled. Those who remained jumped at shadows, weapons raised at every sound. Alexis moved among them like wind, never seen, never heard. Her mission was evolving. It wasn't about escape anymore. She had seen the plans, the maps, the transmissions. Hassan was preparing a coordinated attack on an American base, hundreds of lives at risk. If she escaped now, she might save herself. But if she stayed, If she finished what she had started, she could save them all. The choice was clear. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was hunting. And Hassan, the man who had smiled as the cell door closed, had just become prey. Why hadn't anyone questioned the disappearances sooner? That thought gnawed at Hassan as he paced his command bunker, shadows dancing across the maps pinned to his wall. 4 men gone. No signs of escape. No bodies, just absence, like they had been erased. His fighters muttered about curses now, about spirits in the mountains. He silenced them with threats, but their eyes betrayed what their mouths didn't dare speak. Fear was taking root, and fear was more lethal than bullets. Meanwhile, Alexis crouched in the dark of a maintenance tunnel, listening to every shouted order that bled through the vents. She knew his voice now, deep, commanding but fraying at the edges. Hassan was losing his grip. That was her weapon, and tonight she would sharpen it. She moved just before midnight, shadows stretching long across stone corridors. Her stolen uniform no longer fit cleanly. Blood stained the cuffs, dirt darkened the fabric. But it was enough to blend, enough to let her walk where hesitation meant exposure. Her target was clear, the communications room. Without it, Hassan was blind. 2 guards flanked the entrance, rifles slung too loose on their shoulders. They spoke in low voices, laughter that carried the brittle edge of fear. She watched them from the corner, memorizing rhythm. One leaned against the wall, shoulders slumping. The other tapped his boot, nervous energy betraying him. Weakness, always weakness. She didn't rush. Rushing got you killed. She waited until a generator rumbled nearby, covering her step. In 2 strides she was behind them. A blade slid beneath one jaw. A forearm crushed the windpipe of the other. Quick, clean, silent. Their bodies slumped together like old friends. She dragged them into shadow, wiped her blade on her sleeve, and slipped inside. The room was dim, wires snaking across the floor, radios crackling with half-heard transmissions. A single operator sat at the console, headset pressed tight. He muttered as he scribbled notes, attention fixed on the static. He never saw her coming. Her knife pressed gently against his throat. "Quiet," she whispered. He froze. For a moment she considered sparing him. For a moment she remembered being 19, hands trembling as she tried to save a life slipping through her fingers. But this wasn't training. This wasn't mercy. The knife moved. He dropped without a sound. She sat at the console, scanning transmissions, eyes flicking across frequencies. And then she found it, encrypted coordinates, coded messages tying Hassan to a wider network. This wasn't just one compound. It was part of something bigger. Her stomach tightened. If she didn't end this here, others would die, hundreds, maybe more. She copied the data, committing coordinates to memory. Her training in medical triage whispered through her mind. Prioritize the most urgent, the most preventable. That principle applied here too. The most urgent threat was Hassan's compound. The most preventable disaster was the attack he was planning. She couldn't save everyone, but she could save enough. When the morning came, Hassan found silence where there should have been reports. His comms officer hadn't checked in. His perimeter guards hadn't returned. And then the explosion came. A fireball tore through the weapons storage on the west side of the compound. Ammunition cooked off in a violent chain reaction, sending shockwaves rattling through steel and stone. Men screamed, scrambled, weapons half-loaded as smoke filled the corridors. Hassan stormed from his bunker, fury twisting his features. "Find her," he roared. "She is here, she is doing this." But even as he shouted, doubt gnawed at him. How could one woman dismantle what 40 fighters had built? How could she slip through walls, through eyes, through locks as if they didn't exist? Somewhere deep down, a voice whispered what he refused to admit. She was better. Alexis crouched in the aftermath of the blast, smoke curling around her. Her chest heaved with exertion, eyes watering from the acrid air. The explosion had gone better than she planned. Secondary charges had ignited fuel reserves, leaving the west side crippled. But her ears rang with the screams of men who hadn't died instantly. Some were burned, writhing in pain. Her instincts warred. The medic inside her screamed to help, to bind wounds, to ease suffering. Her mission whispered louder, "Don't break cover, don't risk it. You can't save them all." She pressed her back against the wall, nails digging into her palms. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, voice breaking. And for a heartbeat, she hated herself. She retreated to the tunnels before daylight, every step echoing with ghosts of those she couldn't save. Once hidden, she crouched low, staring at her trembling hands. These were the same hands that had once cradled children in Afghan villages, treating fevers with antibiotics from a worn pouch. The same hands that had tied tourniquets on brothers in uniform, whispering promises that help was coming. Now they were stained with death. "Am I still me?" she whispered. The silence didn't answer. Her grandmother's words floated back instead. "You can walk between shadows and light, Alexis, but you must choose which path you stay on." She didn't know which path she was on anymore. By the sixth night, Hassan's compound was unrecognizable. Once disciplined fighters now snapped at each other like cornered animals. Patrols moved in jittery circles, weapons raised at shadows. Rumors spread faster than orders. She was a spirit, a demon, a punishment sent from the sky. Hassan tried to rally them with speeches, but doubt was etched into every face. He ordered tighter patrols, harsher discipline. Men still vanished. Alexis wasn't reckless. She struck only when the opportunity was certain, but she made sure the disappearances were irregular enough to seem supernatural. A body here, a guard missing there. Radios left hissing with no voice to answer. Psychological warfare. Her grandfather would have been proud. But pride didn't fill the hollow growing in her chest. One evening, as she prepared another strike, she paused. Her reflection stared back from a puddle in the tunnel, filthy, eyes hollow, lips cracked. For a moment, she didn't recognize herself. This wasn't the medic her team had trusted. This wasn't the daughter her grandmother prayed for. This wasn't even the ranger her grandfather had trained. This was something else. And maybe that was what survival demanded. Above her, Hassan tightened his grip. He doubled guard rotations. He locked down food supplies. He ordered interrogations of his own men, suspecting betrayal. But suspicion only deepened the fracture. Loyalty bled away under fear. Some men slipped into the night, fleeing the compound entirely. Every departure was another victory for Alexis. She didn't need to kill them all. She just needed them broken. And they were breaking. Still, Hassan wasn't finished. He was cunning, seasoned, too proud to admit defeat. He knew she had to be hiding somewhere inside his walls, and if she was human, just human, he could trap her. But what he didn't know was that Alexis wasn't hiding anymore. She was waiting. Because her mission had changed, escape wasn't enough. This wasn't about one prisoner anymore. It was about an attack she had uncovered, one that could wipe out an entire American base if she didn't end Hassan here. Her decision was made. She wasn't going to run. She was going to finish this. In the silence of the tunnels, she laid out her stolen weapons. Ammunition, knives, improvised explosives crafted from medical supplies and scavenged chemicals. Her hands moved with practiced calm, every click and snap a reminder of training drilled into her bones. But beneath that calm, her heart carried a truth she hadn't admitted aloud. Every step deeper into this mission cost her a piece of herself. The medic, the granddaughter, the girl who once listened to the wind in the trees. She was leaving those behind, one by one. All that remained was the Reaper. And the Reaper was ready. Why did the walls tremble when no earthquake shook the mountains? That was the first thought in Hassan's mind as another blast ripped through his compound. He stumbled, clutching the edge of the table, maps scattering like leaves in a storm. Dust rained from the ceiling, mingling with the shouts of his fighters scrambling outside. It wasn't natural, it wasn't random, it was her. The prisoner. The ghost. The American woman who should have been broken by now. Instead, she was dismantling everything he had built. Alexis crouched behind a collapsed wall, smoke stinging her eyes. Her ears rang from the detonation she had set minutes earlier, a carefully rigged charge in the fuel depot. Fire roared skyward, black smoke blotting out the stars. Men ran in every direction, shouting, confused. Some carried buckets, others rifles, none with coordination. She moved among them like shadow, rifle close, knife closer. Not every strike needed to be a kill. Sometimes it was enough to sever a wire, to jam a door, to vanish just as a patrol rounded the corner. Fear did the rest. Her grandfather had always told her, a man who believes the world itself hunts him will break faster than any man under fire. Tonight, Hassan's men believed the world itself had turned against them. But with each explosion, each fallen guard, Alexis felt the weight grow heavier. She had been a medic once. She had sworn to save, to cradle life against death's pull. Now she was the pull. Every scream twisted inside her chest. Every body that fell to the ground pressed against her memory like a fingerprint that would never fade. She told herself it was necessary, that every enemy lost here saved dozens, maybe hundreds of her brothers and sisters in uniform. She repeated it like prayer. But prayers didn't erase blood. From the bunker, Hassan barked orders. Seal the east gate, double the patrols, she cannot be everywhere. But his words fell flat. His men were scattered, their fear growing sharper than his authority. Some obeyed, others fled, their shadows slipping into mountains under cover of fire and smoke. He slammed his fist against the table, teeth bared. "She is one soldier," he shouted. "One." Yet even as he spoke, the voice in his chest answered, not just one. Something more. Something he hadn't prepared for. Alexis slipped through smoke-filled halls, steps steady despite the chaos. Her body ached, shoulder throbbing, lungs burning, but her focus narrowed to razor's edge. She carried maps now, stolen from the comms room, coordinates memorized, networks exposed. Hassan wasn't just a leader of 40 fighters. He was a link in a chain that stretched across valleys and borders. If she cut the chain here, others would crumble. That thought steadied her. Still, shadows of doubt followed her. She remembered holding a boy in Afghanistan, barely 18, his chest torn open by shrapnel. She had pressed her hands into the wound, whispered that he would make it, felt the life drain from him anyway. She had hated the enemy then, for placing her in the position of choosing which lives she could save. Now she was that enemy, choosing who lived, who didn't. The contradiction pressed hard, but there was no time to dwell. Because tonight was the point of no return. She reached the armory, slipping past guards already fleeing the fires outside. Inside, crates of weapons stacked high, ammunition glinting under dim light. Her hands moved quickly, charges planted, fuses twisted, timers set. She remembered Ranger school drills, instructors drilling into them. Sabotage isn't just destruction, it's message. Let them know you control the ground they thought was theirs. This wasn't sabotage anymore, this was war. She set the last charge and slipped out, timing her steps with the rumble of another blast overhead. Minutes later, the compound shook again. Fire tore through the armory, flames licking the night. Hassan's fortress was bleeding from every artery. And Alexis was the knife. Hassan staggered into the courtyard, coughing smoke. His men clustered around him, eyes wide, hands shaking on their rifles. They looked to him for strength, but all he could offer was rage. "She cannot have done this alone," he shouted. "There must be others, Americans hiding among us." But no one answered, because they had all seen the truth. It was her alone. And nothing was stopping her. Alexis crouched on the rooftop, rifle steady, watching the chaos below. She could end him now. One squeeze, one bullet. Hassan's body sprawled in the dust. But she held her fire. Not yet. Killing him was only part of the mission. She needed his files, his network, his plans. Without them, the attack might still happen. She would wait. She would corner him. She would end not just the man, but the chain he commanded. Patience, always patience. Still, the temptation gnawed at her. To finish it now. To erase the face that had smirked at her captivity. To silence the man who had thought her weak. She steadied her breath, forcing the urge down. Her grandmother's voice whispered, "A hunter who strikes too early starves. Wait until the prey walks willingly into your snare." So she waited. Inside, Hassan raged. He demanded search teams. He ordered men into tunnels. He screamed until his voice cracked. But his men looked away, eyes down, fear outweighing loyalty. They didn't believe in him anymore. They believed in her. The ghost who moved through their walls, the shadow who set fires in the night. And belief was more powerful than orders. By dawn, the compound was unrecognizable. Fires smoldered, weapons gone, communications dead. Hassan's force fractured, half fled, half broken. And Alexis, hidden deep in the tunnels, finally let herself breathe. But rest didn't come, only the weight of what she had done. Her hands shook as she cleaned her blade, as she reloaded her weapon. She whispered the names of the fallen, not hers, but theirs. Every face she remembered from the shadows, every life she had taken. It was her way of carrying them, her way of not letting the humanity slip completely away. But she knew the truth. The line was gone now. She wasn't the medic anymore. She wasn't the healer. She was the Reaper. And the Reaper wasn't finished. That night, as stars returned to the sky, she made her choice. She could have escaped then. She could have slipped into the mountains, called for extraction, survived. But she didn't. Because survival wasn't the mission anymore. The mission was Hassan. And until he was gone, she couldn't leave. The hunt was almost over. And she would be the one to end it. Why hadn't he run yet? That was the question that pressed against Alexis's mind as she crouched in the tunnels, studying the compound above through vents and cracks. Hassan should have fled by now. Any rational commander would have. His men were broken, his weapons destroyed, his communications silenced. But still he stayed. Why? Because men like Hassan didn't run. They clung to power even as it burned around them. Pride was heavier than fear. And pride would be his downfall. She moved silently through the lower corridors, eyes sharp in the dim light. Her body ached from nights without sleep, her wounds pulsing with each step, but her focus remained unbroken. Every sound mattered. Every shadow carried meaning. The compound had become a graveyard of noise, men whispering, boots scuffing nervously, the constant hiss of flames still eating through rubble. But fewer voices carried now. Fewer boots patrolled. She had thinned the herd. And soon, only one would remain. Hassan stalked his own halls like a caged beast. He no longer barked orders from his bunker. He walked with rifle in hand, eyes bloodshot, fury radiating from every step. His men watched him warily, whispers silenced when he passed. They didn't see a leader anymore. They saw a man unraveling. Inside, Hassan's thoughts clawed like knives. How had one woman done this? How had one soldier undone years of planning, months of preparation, with nothing but patience and shadows? It wasn't possible, and yet here he was, standing amid the ruins of his empire. He tightened his grip on the rifle. If his men couldn't kill her, he would. Alexis listened through the vent, Hassan's voice echoing down the corridor. He was closer now. She could almost hear the ragged edges of his breathing. The urge to strike rose sharp in her chest. She could end it now, burst from the tunnel, put a bullet through him before he had time to raise his weapon. But instinct whispered caution, not yet. Her grandmother's words lingered. A hunter waits until the prey's heart is already broken. Then the kill is certain. Hassan wasn't broken yet. Desperate, yes. Angry, yes, but broken, not fully. She needed him to feel the weight of his defeat. She needed him cornered so completely that there would be no recovery, no chance his network could survive. Patience, always patience. That night she struck again, not at his men, not at his weapons. At him. She planted charges in the east wing of the compound, the one nearest his command bunker, timed carefully, small enough not to collapse the structure entirely, large enough to send a message. When the blast came, it rattled his walls, shook his maps from the table, sent dust cascading from the ceiling. Hassan staggered, ears ringing, rage boiling hotter than ever. He stormed into the courtyard, shouting, "Show yourself," he roared into the smoke. "You are not a ghost, you are flesh and blood, face me." His men stared at him with hollow eyes, not one moved. Because none of them wanted to face her. Alexis watched from the rooftop, rifle steady. She could see the whites of his eyes, the tension in his jaw. She could end it now. Her finger hovered over the trigger. But again she held back. Not yet. Not until she had his files, his network, his secrets. Because killing a man wasn't enough. She needed to kill what he represented. Hassan's paranoia grew teeth. He ordered the tunnels searched again, this time personally accompanying the teams. He stalked the corridors with rifle raised, shouting into the darkness. "Come out, show yourself, coward." But the tunnels only answered with silence. And from that silence, Alexis moved. She trailed him at a distance, ghosting his steps, always close enough to hear, never close enough to be seen. Her breath shallow, her pulse steady. He was hunting her. But he didn't realize she was hunting him. Her mind flicked back to Afghanistan, to another hunt, to another night when she had stalked enemies through dust and fire, her hands torn from climbing rocks, her rifle slick with sweat. She had moved then with the same precision, the same patience. But back then, she wasn't alone. Her team had been counting on her, trusting her, believing she was the medic who could save them when everything went wrong. Now she was alone. And she wondered if the team she had lost in the ambush would even recognize her anymore. Would they see their medic, or the shadow she had become? The question gnawed at her, but still she moved. Because doubt didn't change necessity. By the 8th night, Hassan's compound was almost empty. Smoke curled from collapsed walls. Weapons caches lay in ashes. Communications were silent. His men dwindled, some dead, most fled. Only the most loyal, or the most afraid, remained. And Hassan himself, packing like a man haunted by the ghost of his own arrogance. Alexis knew the time was close. She returned to her tunnel hideout, laying out her stolen weapons one last time. A rifle, 2 pistols, knives, improvised explosives, enough to finish this. Her hands shook as she checked each piece. Not from fear, but from exhaustion, from the weight of days spent as both predator and prey. She whispered to herself, a mantra that steadied her pulse. For them, for the ones I lost, for the ones who still live. And with those words, the medic inside her quieted. The Reaper rose. Hassan stared into the cracked mirror of his bunker. His reflection looked back with wild eyes, beard singed from smoke, sweat streaking his face. He barely recognized himself. He thought of the videos he had planned to release. The propaganda. The American woman broken, her spirit crushed, a trophy to wave before the world. Now the only broken figure in his bunker was him. He gripped the rifle tighter. If he couldn't have victory, he would have blood. He would find her. He would put a bullet in her chest. Or she would put one in his. Either way, it would end tonight. Above, Alexis climbed silently through rubble, moving closer to the heart of the compound. Every step carried the weight of inevitability. She had waited long enough. The hunt was nearly over, and when the final strike came, it would not just be for her survival. It would be for every soldier whose name she carried, for every voice she still heard in the dark, for the medic she once was, and for the reaper she had become. The end was close, and she was ready. Why did silence feel heavier than gunfire? That was the question Alexis carried as she moved through the ruins of the compound. No more shouted orders, no more boots rushing across gravel, just silence, thick and waiting. The firelight flickered against broken walls, shadows stretching long like fingers reaching for her. Somewhere in that silence, Hassan waited. And she knew tonight there would be no more patience. Tonight the hunt ended. Hassan moved through the smoke with rifle pressed tight, sweat dripping into his eyes. He had lost his men, his weapons, his command. All that remained was his pride, brittle but unbroken. He replayed her face in his mind, the medic dragged through dust, eyes defiant even in chains. He remembered his promise, 1 week. She won't last. Now 7 nights had passed, and he was the one trembling. No more tricks, no more shadows, he would face her himself. He whispered to himself, steadying his hand. She bleeds, she dies. But even as he said it, doubt twisted in his gut. Because what if she did? Alexis crouched behind a half-collapsed wall, scanning the courtyard. Her heart beat steady, but her breath came shallow, every muscle coiled tight. She could feel him near. The same way she'd once tracked deer in the mountains, reading the shift of wind, the silence of birds. Prey gave itself away, not through noise but through absence. And right now, the absence was thickest in the command bunker. She tightened her grip on her rifle. Not long now. She slipped inside, the air thick with dust. Maps scattered across the floor. A lantern flickered on the table, its weak glow casting the room in uneven light. Empty. Or so it seemed. Her instincts screamed. She ducked just as a burst of gunfire tore through the wall where her head had been. Splinters cut across her cheek, heat searing past her ear. She rolled, rifle up, eyes locking on the shadow behind the desk. Hassan. His face twisted with rage, teeth bared, rifle braced. He fired again, bullets sparking against stone as she slid behind cover. The air filled with the thunder of gunfire, deafening in the enclosed space. This was it. She steadied her breath, pressing her cheek against the stock. Patience, timing. His fire slowed, magazine running dry. She rose, quick and sharp, sight locked. One squeeze. Her shot cracked, slamming into the desk, splinters exploding inches from his face. He ducked, cursed, fumbled for another magazine. She advanced, low and fast, heart pounding. He rose to meet her, rifle snapping up. Too close for rifles now. The clash came sudden, brutal. Her rifle knocked aside. His fist swung, catching her jaw. Pain flared white, stars exploding in her vision. She staggered back, knife flashing in her hand. He came at her, heavy and furious, hands like iron. She ducked, blade slicing across his arm. He roared, swinging again, the butt of his rifle slamming into her ribs. Breath left her in a rush. She stumbled, knife clattering to the floor. His hands closed around her throat. The world narrowed to pressure, to darkness creeping at the edges. His face loomed close, eyes wild, spit flying as he snarled. "You are no ghost," he hissed. "You are flesh, and flesh breaks." Her vision blurred. Black spots spread across her sight, her lungs burned. And then her grandfather's voice. "Little warrior, bend without breaking. Use their strength against them." She went limp. For a heartbeat, Hassan grinned, believing she had given in. That was his mistake. Her hand shot up, grabbing the wound she had carved into his arm moments before. She dug her fingers into it, twisting, forcing a scream from his throat. His grip loosened. She surged upward, driving her forehead into his nose. Bone cracked. He staggered back, clutching his face. She lunged, snatching her knife from the ground. The Reaper rose. Hassan's eyes widened as she advanced, blade glinting in lantern light. Blood ran from his nose, his arm, his pride. Still he raised his rifle, defiant to the last. "You think killing me ends this," he spat. "Others will rise, others will come." Her voice was steady, quiet. "Maybe, but not tonight." She moved before he could fire. Knife flashing, she closed the distance. His shot cracked wild, grazing her shoulder, spinning her with the force. Pain flared white-hot, but she didn't stop. Her blade found its mark, sinking deep into his chest. He gasped, eyes wide with disbelief. She held his gaze, her breath ragged. "You should have let me die in that cell." He collapsed, body hitting stone with finality. His rifle clattered beside him, lifeless fingers still curled. The silence returned. Heavy, absolute. It was over. But victory didn't feel like triumph. Alexis stood over his body, chest heaving, blood seeping through her sleeve. The knife trembled in her grip. She had won, she had survived, she had ended the threat. And yet inside, something felt broken. Her hands, once meant to heal, dripped with death. Her oath as a medic, the promises she had whispered to soldiers on battlefields, all of it felt distant. She whispered to the silence, voice cracking, "I didn't want this." But the silence didn't care. The silence simply held her. She staggered from the bunker into the courtyard. The compound lay in ruins, fires smoldering, walls collapsed, weapons reduced to ash. The night sky stretched endless above, stars watching with indifferent light. She sank to her knees, exhaustion crashing over her. Her body screamed, her mind reeled, but her spirit refused to break. Because even if she had lost pieces of herself, she had saved others. And maybe that was enough. In the days to come, they would find her here, a lone soldier in the ashes of an enemy fortress. Intelligence files clutched in her hand, evidence of a network shattered before it could strike. They would call her a hero, a legend, the Reaper who turned captivity into conquest. But tonight there was no legend. Only a woman kneeling in the dark, carrying the weight of every life she had taken. The medic who had become the predator. The soldier who had survived, but at a cost she couldn't yet name. And as the first light of dawn touched the ruins, she whispered to herself the only truth she knew. "It's over." But deep inside, she wondered if it really was. Why was the dawn so quiet? The compound lay in ruins around her, walls cracked, fires burned to smoldering embers, rifles scattered like bones. And yet as the first light touched the mountains, silence stretched over everything. No shouts, no gunfire, no footsteps. Just stillness. Alexis sat against the wall of the bunker, rifle resting across her knees. Her chest rose and fell in slow, ragged breaths. Blood seeped through the bandage she'd wrapped hastily around her shoulder. Every muscle trembled, exhaustion pulling at her. But her eyes remained open, watching, waiting. Because habit was hard to kill. She knew Hassan was gone. She had felt the fight leave him in that final moment, the weight of his body collapsing against stone. But ghosts of men like him lingered long after their last breath. And until she was gone from this place, she would not lower her guard. 3 days passed before the helicopter arrived. 3 days of scavenging, rationing water from broken pipes, tending to her wounds with improvised dressings. 3 days of silence broken only by the crackle of dying fires and the distant calls of carrion birds circling overhead. But she wasn't idle. She gathered what she could, files from Hassan's bunker, radios from the comms room, coordinates scrawled in blood-stained notebooks. She cataloged, organized, memorized. Because survival wasn't enough. She hadn't come this far to leave with only her own life. On the third morning, the thrum of rotors echoed through the valley. At first, she thought it was memory playing tricks, but the sound grew louder, steady, real. She climbed to the roof, smoke staining her fatigues, one arm clutching the folder of intelligence tight against her chest. She fired a flare skyward, the red arc splitting the pale dawn. The helicopter banked, turned, descended. Through the open side door, she saw the pilot's eyes widen as he scanned the devastation. His voice crackled over comms. "Command, you're not gonna believe this. We came to extract one prisoner." The helicopter touched down in the courtyard, blades kicking dust into the air. Soldiers jumped out, weapons raised, scanning the ruins. Their rifles dropped slowly as they saw her, just one woman standing steady amid the wreckage. Her voice was calm when she spoke. "Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan, I have intelligence for debrief." The disbelief in their eyes said more than words ever could. Back at base, the questions came fast. Officers leaned across tables, eyes sharp, pens scratching against endless reports. How many fighters were here? How did you infiltrate the communications hub? How did you survive without supplies? And always how? Alexis answered quietly, plainly. No embellishments, no theatrics. She described patrol routes memorized, tunnels exploited, explosives improvised. She laid the files across the table, each page proof of a network dismantled, an attack prevented. But when they pressed harder, what was it like? How did you endure? She fell silent. Because there were no words for hunger gnawing at your ribs while fear gnawed at your mind. No words for choosing between the medic you were and the predator you became. Some truths couldn't be written in reports. Major Reynolds led the debrief. He was a seasoned officer, not easily shaken, but as he flipped through the files, his expression faltered. "Sergeant Morgan," he said slowly, "what you accomplished in 8 days is unprecedented. This wasn't just escape. You conducted an intelligence operation, dismantled a terrorist cell, and prevented an attack on American forces. Alone." His words felt heavy, but Alexis shook her head. "I did what I had to do, sir, nothing more." Reynolds studied her, as though searching for the full story behind her eyes, but he didn't press. Perhaps he knew some truths were meant to stay unspoken. 6 months later, Alexis wore new stripes, Sergeant First Class, offered a position in an elite special operations unit. Her story spread quietly at first, then louder, passed between soldiers in barracks, whispered in classrooms at survival schools. The woman who had been captured, who had turned captivity into opportunity, who had walked into a prison cell and walked out alone, carrying the ashes of an enemy force in her wake. But legends never tell the whole story. They didn't tell of the nights she whispered apologies into the dark for lives she took. They didn't tell of the faces that visited her dreams, 19-year-old guards who would never see another dawn. They didn't tell of the medic's oath she felt slipping from her hands like sand. The legend was clean, the truth was not. And maybe that was how it had to be. Today, Master Sergeant Alexis Reaper Morgan trains soldiers in survival. She walks them through forests, across deserts, through mountains, teaching lessons passed from a Green Beret grandfather and a Cherokee grandmother. She teaches them patience, resilience, invisibility. But more than that, she teaches them this. Strength isn't avoiding capture. Strength is what you do when the world believes you're broken. Her students watch her with wide eyes, hanging on every word. They hear the legend. They learn the techniques. But what they don't see are the nights she still wakes in silence, chest heaving, whispering the names of men she can't forget. That's her burden, not theirs. Sometimes, when she's alone on the training grounds, she presses her hand against the soil, feeling the earth steady beneath her. Her grandmother's words come back then, soft as wind through trees. "Flow with the land. It will carry you." And she remembers her grandfather's voice, stern as ever. "Never give up when others think you're defeated." Between those voices, she finds balance. Not healer, not predator. Both. Always both. So what is the lesson of Alexis Morgan's story? It isn't that one soldier can do the work of 40. It isn't that violence wins where patience fails. It's simpler. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't boast. It doesn't announce itself. Sometimes dignity acts in silence. Sometimes strength reveals itself only when underestimated. And sometimes the hunter discovers too late that the prey was never prey at all. Just resilience wearing chains, waiting for the moment to rise.